Chapter 1. Intelligence is the ability to think and learn, but a turbulent world demands an ability to rethink and unlearn. The first instinct fallacy is when one gets an answer wrong at the first attempt. Out of 1,500 students tested in Illinois, 50% changed their answers from wrong to right, while only 25% changed from right to wrong. People who rethink their solutions generally improve their scores. People's problem is not about rethinking their answers, but hesitation to rethink. Cognitive laziness causes the first instinct fallacy. We'd instead stick with an old perspective, then grapple with a new one. Our desire for predictability makes us resist rethinking. To present our identities from being threatened, we avoid reconsidering things we believe deeply. Such reconsideration makes us feel like we're losing a part of ourselves. We embrace rethinking when it concerns our possessions. We buy new clothes, renovate our houses, and change our mobile phones. Why can't we apply the same principle to our thought patterns? Psychologists call this tendency seizing and freezing. We prefer comments that make us feel good over ideas that force us to think hard. Like a frog in lukewarm water that is gradually heated, we often fail to rethink situations until it is too late. You won't use Windows 95, but will stick to ideas you formed in 1995. Guess what? The frog story is not valid, but we believe it to be true. A frog dropped in hot water will not leap out of it because it will be badly burned immediately. It is a frog in lukewarm water that has the likelihood of escape when the water begins to become uncomfortable. So it is not the frog that cannot rethink. We are the ones who often fail to question these stories. Most acts of rethinking don't require any special skill or ingenuity. Adam Grant. The value of rethinking cannot be overemphasized. Mental flexibility is vital to success in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We must learn to encourage others to flex their mental muscles. These can be things we know, assumptions we make, or opinions we hold. Together, they form a part of our sense of self. Assumptions, instincts, and habits are the tools we use to interpret life. We must include having an open mind in the toolkit because it can spell the difference between life and death in our personal and professional lives. Chapter 2. Rethinking is both a skill set and a mindset. In a stable world, staying true to our knowledge and expertise makes sense. But we live in a rapidly changing world where we need to do as much rethinking as we do thinking. As of 2009, BlackBerry accounted for almost 50% of the US smartphone market. 5 years later, it had dropped to less than 1%. Mike Lazaridis, the smart device creator, struggled with rethinking, and that spelled the extinction of his phenomenal invention. Psychologist Phil Tetlock found that we slip into three major modes as we think and talk: preacher mode, prosecutor mode, and politician mode. We engage preacher mode when expressing our core beliefs, prosecutor mode when examining other people's opinions, and politician mode when we want to promote ideas that we support. But there is a fourth mode we all need to engage to become rethinkers. It is the scientist mode. Thinking as a scientist forces us to have second thoughts about almost everything. Scientists doubt what they know, are curious about what they don't know, and update their views based on new data. Being a scientist is not just possessing a skill set, but also having a unique frame of mind. This frame of mind is different from preaching, prosecuting, and politicking mindsets. It is in scientist mode that we find the truth on any matter. Scientist mode thinking is not reserved for the laboratory alone. People in other fields can learn to think like scientists too. European researchers ran an experiment with more than 100 Italian founders that cut across different domains. They divided them into two groups. One group received training in the scientific mode of thinking, while the other group received regular consideration. The following year, researchers found that the scientific group entrepreneurs made over $12,000 in revenue, while the control group grossed under $300 in revenue. The scientific group pivoted more than twice, while the control group stuck to the normal way of doing business. Sometimes professional scientists fail to use the tools of their trade. When they want to promote their pet theories, they enter preacher mode. Sometimes they abandon accuracy for what is popular, politician mode, and they can be hell-bent on debunking ideas that disagree with theirs, prosecutor mode. Mental horsepower doesn't guarantee mental dexterity. Adam Grant. Did you know, by 2008, BlackBerry's valuation was over $70 billion. Chapter 3. Rethinking is an increasingly important habit in life. Research reveals that the faster you recognize patterns, the more likely you will fall for stereotypes. People with high IQs have more difficulty updating their beliefs. Confirmation bias and desirability bias make intelligent people contort their intelligence into a weapon against the truth. Confirmation bias sees what we expect to see, while desirability bias sees what we want to see. One study revealed that when math whizzes that were either liberal or conservative were told to analyze data on ideological issues that activate strong emotions, each group failed to see evidence that contradicted their existing beliefs. For example, liberals did worse at evaluating evidence that gun bans failed, while conservative math geniuses couldn't see evidence that gun bans worked. Being good at thinking makes you worse at rethinking. Adam Grant. When people think in scientific mode, they do not allow ideas to become ideologies. They teach from evidence rather than preach from intuition. They lead with quizzes and puzzles instead of answers and solutions. Scientific thinking requires an active search for evidence that might prove us wrong. Reacting with an open mind is not enough. We must be open-minded by default. Rethinking in preacher mode is a moral weakness. In prosecutor mode, it is seen as admitting defeat, and in politician mode, it is flip-flopping in response to carrots and sticks. We shift based on sharper logic and more actual data in scientific mode. The purpose of learning isn't to affirm our beliefs, it's to evolve our beliefs. Adam Grant. Chapter 4. The rethinking cycle starts with intellectual humility. Knowing what we don't know and areas where we are ignorant is vital. This recognition opens the door to doubt. We become curious as we question our current understanding of what we don't know. Next, we make discoveries. These discoveries lead us to intellectual humility as it shows us how much we don't know. If knowledge is power, knowing what we don't know is wisdom. Scientific thinking favors humility over pride, doubt over certainty, curiosity over closure. Adam Grant. The opposite of the rethinking cycle is the overconfidence cycle. We enter the overconfidence cycle when we leave scientific mode for preaching mode. In preaching mode, we are unable to see our knowledge gaps. The pride that comes from believing we've found the truth breeds conviction instead of doubt. This conviction launches us into prosecutor mode, where we want to change other people's minds when ours is set in stone. From prosecutor mode, we enter politician mode. Confirmation bias and desirability bias make us ignore whatever doesn't win our constituents' favor. Parents, bosses, high school mates, and anyone we are trying to impress. The validation we get makes us arrogant, and the overconfidence cycle restarts. Instead of pressure testing our beliefs, we fall victim to the fat cat syndrome and rest on our laurels. Components of the rethinking cycle are humility, doubt, curiosity, discovery. Components of the overconfidence cycle are pride, conviction, confirmation and desirability biases, validation. While Mike Lazarus operates in the overconfidence cycle, Steve Jobs used the rethinking process to launch Apple from the brink of bankruptcy to become the world's most valuable company. Avoid comments like, "That will never work here. That's not what my experience has shown. That's too complicated. Let's not overthink it. That's the way we've always done it." Despite Jobs' dislike for smartphones, he embraced intellectual humility when his engineers convinced him to know what he didn't know. The iPhone was not his idea, but he was willing to run with the idea when his engineers convinced him they were not turning Apple into a phone company, but wanted to add the iPhone to the existing list of products they made. Knowledge puffs up. Good judgment requires that we possess the skills and the will to open our minds. Chapter 5. Recognize your cognitive blind spots and revise your thoughts accordingly. We have blind spots to our knowledge and opinions. These blind spots can leave us blind to our blindness. Rethinking is possible when we gain the confidence that allows us to see ourselves clearly and update our views where necessary. Having the right dose of confidence requires that we find the sweet spot between imposter syndrome and armchair quarterback syndrome. Imposter syndrome occurs when a person's competence outweighs their confidence. Armchair quarterback syndrome occurs when a person's confidence level is greater than their competence level. Most sports fans fall into this category. The Dunning-Kruger effect states that those who can't don't know they can't. This effect describes the arrogance of ignorance. It is incompetent people who brim with overconfidence on any subject matter. The Dunning-Kruger studies revealed that people who scored the lowest on tests of logical reasoning, grammar, and sense of humor thought they performed better than 62% of their peers when the actual number was 12%. Ego, a tendency to deny our weaknesses, prevents us from rethinking. The ability to think about our thinking is called a metacognitive skill. People who are able to rethink must possess a good dose of this skill. Arrogance is ignorance plus conviction, while humility is permeable filter that absorbs life experience and converts it to knowledge and wisdom. Arrogance is a rubber shield that life experience simply bounces off of. Tim Urban. A blend of confidence and humility puts us in the rethinking loop. Confidence is a measure of how much you believe in yourself, not how much you believe in your methods. Humility is not about having low self-confidence. It It is about being grounded and recognizing your fallibility. Confidence humility is the sweet spot of confidence that improves the quality of our rethinking. While there is ongoing research to find out when imposter syndrome can be beneficial versus when it can be detrimental, we know that it has at least 3 upsides. It motivates us to work harder, smarter, and become better learners. Arrogance leaves us blind to our weakness. Humility is a reflective lens. It helps us see them clearly. Confident humility is a corrective lens. It enables us to overcome those weaknesses. Adam Grant. Chapter 6. Attachment prevents us from rethinking, but detachment helps us unlearn, relearn, and discover new things. When we attach ourselves to our ideas and opinions, we close the door to recognizing when our opinions are off the mark and the need to rethink them. We become desperate to be right all the time and feel sad when we discover we are wrong. To unlock the joy of being wrong, we need to detach. Adam Grant. When you look back at the last year, do you realize how stupid you were? If yes, it's a good thing. It shows you've learned. We need to detach our present from our past and our opinions from our identity. Detach your identity from your opinions. We often define ourselves in terms of our beliefs, ideas, and ideologies. This definition prevents us from changing our minds as the world changes and knowledge evolves. Your identity should be tied to your values, not your beliefs. Values are core principles in life like excellence, generosity, freedom, and fairness, or security and integrity. These principles enable you to be open-minded about the best ways to promote them. When you define yourself by values, you become flexible and open to update your beliefs in light of new evidence. People who are comfortable being wrong are not afraid to make fun of themselves. Research shows that the more frequently we laugh at ourselves, the happier we become. Insecure people make fun of others. Turn your past misconceptions into sources of present amusement. A paradox in great scientists and super forecasters is that they are so comfortable being wrong because they are terrified of being wrong. Because they are determined to reach the correct answer, they open their minds to stumbling, backtracking, and rerouting in the interim. If you don't change your mind frequently, you're going to be wrong a lot. Jeff Bezos. While we may easily overthrow the inner dictator and admit to ourselves that we were wrong, we may not be strong enough to face outer ridicule. Yet, admitting we were wrong shows that we are honest and willing to learn. It doesn't make us look incompetent or less competent. When presented with new information, you can choose to stubbornly remain in preaching and prosecuting mode, or decide to operate like scientists who are dedicated to the pursuit of truth, rather than sticking to their guns. Chapter 7. Task conflicts improve performance, while relationship conflicts can be destructive. Task conflicts are clashes about ideas and opinions. Relationship conflicts are personal, emotional clashes filled with friction and animosity. Teams that have more relationship conflicts than task conflicts generally perform poorly. High-performing teams begin with high task conflicts but keep relationship conflicts as minimal as possible. That helps them to execute effectively and achieve greater results. Relationship conflicts prevent us from rethinking because we are either self-righteous preachers, spiteful prosecutors, or single-minded politicians while at it. Task conflicts force us to rethink our ideas as there are diverse thoughts on the table. These ideas make us enter into scientist mode, where we search for the truth. Sadly, many of us have developed an aversion for productive disagreement. Research shows that children whose parents constructively disagree feel emotionally safe in elementary school and demonstrate more helpfulness and compassion toward their classmates. Productive disagreements make us more civil and develop our creative muscles. When we are surrounded with agreeable people, rethinking becomes difficult. However, when we have a challenge network, a group of people who are not afraid to point out our blind spots and help us overcome our weaknesses, we open the door to rethinking. An example is when Pixar recruited outside director Brad Bird to keep the company firing on all cylinders. Bird sought out people who were disagreeable, disgruntled, and dissatisfied, black sheep and pirates who were told they could not do something extraordinary. 4 years later, these misfits released Pixar's most complex film ever that grossed $631 million and won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. Strong leaders engage their critics and make themselves stronger. Weak leaders silence their critics and make themselves weaker. Adam Grant. A note of caution. We must prevent task conflicts from spilling into relationship conflicts. How? Frame a dispute as a debate rather than a disagreement. In a debate, you're open to considering dissenting opinions and changing your mind, but a disagreement feels personal and potentially hostile. We debate ideas, not emotions. When you're about to start a task conflict, ask the other person, "Can we debate?" It changes their perception of what is about to ensue. Argue about how, not why. When you ask people how their ideas would work in practice, they are more likely to pick holes in their own argument and become more receptive to alternative options. Chapter 8. To get others to rethink their opinions, a collaborative approach works better than an adversarial approach. People shut down completely or get riled up when we engage them as adversaries. Instead of opening up, they enter defense mode, preaching mode, prosecuting mode, or politicking mode. Our goal should be to get them to think like scientists. Preaching their perspectives makes them double down on their convictions. Prosecuting ours makes them blind to holes in theirs. Playing politics by telling us what they think we want to know makes us unable to discover what they really think. A great debate is not a war. It consists of finding common grounds more than looking for attack weapons. Expert negotiators present fewer points, while average debaters think the more reasons they present, the more their chances of winning. Consequently, they run the risk of diluting strong arguments with weak ones. Another feature of skilled negotiators is that they express curiosity more than engaging an offense-defense strategy. Expert debaters are less assertive. Instead, they occasionally end their comments with questions. When at least one party in a debate engages a scientist's level of humility and curiosity, it improves outcomes for both parties. If we want to change other people's minds, we must be willing to change ours also. Be willing to acknowledge when you agree with your critics and state what you've learned from them. Our motives must be pure when we ask people to think again. That motivation must be a desire for the truth, not to preach, politic, or prosecute. Are you willing to evolve your views in light of logic and data? When hiring, evidence suggests that employers are more interested in hiring candidates who acknowledge legitimate weaknesses. An example is Michelle Hansen, a young woman who applied to be a product manager at an investment company in 2014. She was not qualified for the position and had neither a background nor experience in finance. She opened her cover letter by highlighting those drawbacks. Next, she emphasized a few reasons to hire her nonetheless. Hansen got the job, thrived, and was promoted to lead product development. Showing that you are self-aware enough to discern your shortcomings and secure enough to admit them might help you pass an interview. Focus on a small number of core strengths, show curiosity that may prompt your audience to rethink their positions, and have the motivation and ability to learn. Chapter 9. Thinking again must happen from the outside. We cannot change the world if we are unwilling to change ourselves. When we engage other people, we must encourage them to operate in scientist mode, because that is how they get to the truth. Counterfactual thinking is using our imagination to consider how the circumstances of our lives could have been entirely different if we lived in an alternative reality. When we realize how our stereotypes could have been different, our willingness to update our views might improve. People gain humility when they reflect on how different circumstances could have led them to different beliefs. We can get them there by practicing motivational interviewing. A motivational interview starts with an attitude of humility and curiosity. The process involves asking open-ended questions, engaging in reflective listening, and affirming the person's desire and ability to change. Trying to persuade or advise people may strengthen their initial position if the persuasion fails. The limitation of motivational interviewing is that you and your interviewee must have similar goals. When your goals are not aligned, it might be best to practice influential listening instead. Anxiety and defensiveness reduces when we interact with an empathetic, non-judgmental, attentive listener. Many communicators try to make themselves look smart, but great listeners are more interested in making their audience feel smart. To have productive conversations, it pays to employ perspective seeking rather than perspective taking. Perspective taking requires us to read people's minds, while perspective seeking demands that we talk to people to gain insight into the nuances of their views. Good scientists test their hypothesis by striking up conversations instead of drawing conclusions. Productive conversations are emotionally complex, while unproductive ones have a limited set of positive and negative emotions. Careers, relationships, and communities are open systems because they are constantly in flux. Open systems are influenced by their surroundings. An open system operates by two key principles: equifinality, multifinality. Equifinality means there are multiple paths to the same end, while multifinality means that the same starting point can lead to many different ends. Therefore, we should avoid getting too attached to a particular route or a particular destination. There are multiple tracks to happiness. With humility, we can reconsider our past commitments, question our present decisions, develop the curiosity to reimagine our future plans. Rethinking helps us to lead a more fulfilling life. Conclusion. Strike up conversations with people about rethinking their former positions. Surround yourself with people who challenge your thinking. Affirm them by telling them you respect their pushback. Do not avoid constructive conflicts because they force you to think again. Reframe a disagreement as a debate to encourage people to approach it intellectually rather than personally. To encourage others to rethink, you must learn to ask better questions and listen persuasively. Increase your question-to-statement ratio to help people crystallize their views and uncover reasons for changing these views. Ask how questions rather than why questions. How questions help people see the limits of their understanding. Questions like, how did you form this opinion, and what evidence would change your mind, are ways to open people's minds. Approach disagreements like you would approach a dance. Admit points of convergence to show your willingness to negotiate about what's true. Use a small number of strong points to support your case. Respect other people's autonomy by reinforcing their freedom of choice. If emotions run hot, redirect the discussion to the process. Express your disappointment or frustration and ask if your co-debater shares those feelings. Complexify contentious topics to engender collective rethinking. There are usually more than two sides to a story. Acknowledge competing claims and conflicting results to engage audiences and encourage them to stay curious. Try this. Stop asking kids what they want to be when they grow up. A single identity can close the door to alternatives. Instead, help them to see broad possibilities in their future.